The wind howled through the pines that night, carrying with it the cold bite of an early winter storm sweeping across the New Mexico frontier. The sky was a deep slate gray, and the first flakes of snow drifted down over the rough trails that led toward the scattered wooden cabins of Cedar Creek, a forgotten settlement tucked between low hills and wide, silent plains. Few dared travel after dark in those lands, not with outlaws roaming and tensions still sharp between settlers and the Apache. But one man rode on through the cold, his horse weary, his eyes searching the horizon for light, or mercy. He had been riding since dawn, a dark figure against the pale land. His coat was torn, one arm pressed close to his ribs where the pain throbbed from an old wound reopened. Behind him, miles of desert stretched, scarred by war and loneliness. His name wasn't known in these parts yet. He had once worked as a ranch hand in Texas, once fought for survival along the Rio Grande, and once believed he'd left the blood and dust behind. But life had a way of pulling a man back into the wild. By the time the snow began to fall heavier, his horse stumbled. He dismounted, whispered something low, and led it by the reins along a narrow canyon path. The mountains loomed black and ghostly. He needed shelter, any kind. The air burned his lungs, and his thoughts blurred with exhaustion. Then he saw it. A faint flicker of orange in the distance, like the breath of a hidden fire. He followed it until the trail opened into a small clearing where an old cabin stood half buried in snow. The smoke rising from the chimney promised warmth, and he staggered forward, each step crunching against the frozen earth. When he reached the door, he hesitated. There were markings carved into the wood, symbols of the Apache tribe. He had seen them before, long ago during the bitter skirmishes that had taken so many lives. He lifted his hand and knocked. For a moment, there was only the sound of wind. Then the door creaked open and she appeared. She wasn't what he expected. Wrapped in a faded blanket with her long dark hair falling loose over her shoulders, she looked both fragile and fierce. Her eyes, black and steady, studied him with the calmness of someone who had learned not to fear much anymore. Her skin caught the glow of the firelight, and though her face was lined with years of grief, there was something quietly powerful in her presence. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. He removed his hat, snow spilling from the brim. "Didn't have a choice," he rasped. "Storm's bad. I'll be gone by morning if you let me rest by your fire." She didn't move. Her gaze lingered on the dried blood on his sleeve, the way his breath trembled. Then she stepped aside and motioned him in. Inside, the cabin was small but warm. A fire burned in a stone hearth, filling the room with the scent of smoke and cedar. Animal hides hung along the walls. A single wooden table stood beside a bed that looked carefully made, as though someone had kept this place alive through sheer will. He lowered himself beside the fire, his hands shaking as he reached toward the warmth. The woman poured water from a kettle and handed him a cup. "Thank you," he murmured. She nodded, her expression unreadable. "You've been shot?" "Long time ago," he said. "It's just opened up again. I'll manage." "Men always say that before they die," she replied. Her words carried no cruelty, only weary truth. He glanced up at her then, really seeing her. She was older than he first thought, maybe in her 30s, but there was strength in her bearing, a quiet dignity. He noticed a ring tied to a leather cord around her neck, the silver dulled with age. He didn't ask about it, but she caught him looking and said, "My husband was Apache. He died 3 winters ago." He bowed his head slightly. "I'm sorry. He was a good man." The soldiers didn't think so. The words hung between them, heavy and unspoken with all the history that haunted those lands. The man stared into the fire, remembering faces, smoke, the echoes of gunfire across canyons. He had seen what happened when 2 worlds refused to understand each other. After a while, the woman spoke again. "You're a long way from any town. What brings you here?" He hesitated. "Just running from the past, I suppose." "Been doing that for years." Her eyes softened a little. "The past always finds you." He gave a tired smile. "Yeah, I'm starting to believe that." Outside, the wind battered the cabin walls and snow hissed against the roof. The fire crackled, and silence settled between them again, an uneasy kind of peace. He noticed how carefully everything in the cabin was kept. The herbs hanging from the rafters, the wooden carvings by the window, the folded blankets near the bed. She had built this life out of solitude, out of loss, and yet there was something alive in her eyes, something unbroken. After a long pause, she spoke quietly, almost to herself. "People around here don't come this far. They fear what's left of my people." He looked up. "You live alone?" She nodded. There's no one else to live with. The firelight flickered across her face, revealing the scars of both body and heart. And something stirred in him, an ache he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't pity. It was something deeper, something he didn't know how to name. When he tried to stand, the room swayed around him. She caught his arm before he could fall. Her touch was firm, her fingers rough but gentle. You shouldn't move, she said. You'll tear it open worse. I don't want to be a burden, he muttered. She looked at him then with an expression that softened all the edges of her strength. You're not. Not yet. He sat back down, feeling the warmth of the fire spread through his chilled bones. She brought a clean cloth and a small clay bowl filled with crushed herbs. The smell was sharp, wild sage and something bitter. She began tending to his wound with steady hands, the way someone might care for a lost animal that stumbled to their door. He winced once but said nothing. You've done this before, he said quietly. She didn't look up. I've done it too many times. The wind outside began to calm. The storm was passing, but neither of them moved to speak. There was a strange peace in the quiet, as though the world outside had stopped watching. After a while, she sat back, studying her work. You'll live, she said. Can't remember the last time someone said that with certainty, he replied. Something flickered in her eyes. A small, sad smile. Then maybe it's time you start believing again. He didn't know what to say. The firelight danced in the room and he realized how long it had been since he'd spoken with kindness, since anyone had looked at him without judgment or fear. As he leaned back, half drowsy, he heard her voice, softer than before. I once thought I'd never open this door again. Then you came. He looked toward her, surprised. She was sitting near the fire now, her hands clasped, eyes distant. The flames painted her face in golden shadow. You need shelter, she whispered, almost trembling. And I need someone to love again. The words froze him. They weren't spoken as an invitation, but as a truth she had kept buried for years, one that slipped out because silence had held it too long. He didn't answer right away. His heart thudded in his chest, torn between gratitude and fear. Outside, the storm quieted completely. Only the fire spoke now, crackling softly as though waiting for one of them to move, to speak, to choose what came next. And in that fragile stillness, between the smell of smoke and the faint whistle of the wind, he realized this night would change everything. Though neither of them yet knew whether it would lead to healing or heartbreak, the fire burned low, throwing long shadows across the walls of the cabin. The man sat in silence, listening to the wind whisper through the cracks in the wood. The woman had fallen quiet after those words that still echoed in his mind. She moved about the room, tending to the fire, her every motion careful and measured. He could tell she was not used to speaking much anymore. He wanted to say something, but the weight of her confession held him still. It wasn't just loneliness. In her voice, it was the sound of someone who had lived too long with ghosts. She brought a pot of stew from the fire and set it before him. The smell of roasted corn and dried meat filled the air. He hadn't eaten in a day, maybe more, and though he hesitated, hunger won over pride. She watched him as he took the first bite, her expression unreadable. What happened to your husband? He asked quietly. Her hand stilled for a moment. He was taken, she said, her tone flat. By soldiers who came through this valley 3 winters ago. They said he was part of the uprising. He wasn't. He was trying to make peace, to build a life here. They didn't believe him. The man looked down. And you stayed? I buried him out there, she said, nodding toward the ridge beyond the window. This was our home. I had nowhere else to go. He could hear the strength in her words, but also the sorrow. He understood that kind of loss, the kind that carves a person hollow and leaves only the will to survive. After a moment, she spoke again, her voice softer. What about you? Who were you running from? He hesitated. I used to ride with a man named Claiborne. We worked the ranches near the Rio Grande. Things went bad when the owners stopped paying. Claiborne turned to robbing wagon trains. I tried to walk away, but you know how it goes. Once you're marked, you don't just leave. I've been hunted since. She studied him quietly. So you ran until you couldn't anymore. He nodded. And ended up at your door. A faint smile crossed her lips. Maybe the wind brought you." He almost laughed, but the sound caught in his throat. "I don't believe in fate." "Then believe in storms," she said. "They bring more than rain. They change what they touch." Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and steady. The fire crackled low, and the cabin seemed smaller, almost peaceful. Yet something about her words lingered. He wondered if the storm had indeed carried him here for a reason. Later, when she went to her small bed, he stretched out near the fire. He could hear her breathing softly, the faint creak of the wooden floor under her turning. Sleep came slowly. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw flashes of the past, men shouting, the smell of gunpowder, the faces of those who didn't make it out. He turned over, trying to push it away, but one image stayed. The look in Claiborne's eyes when he'd said, "You'll never outrun your shadow." When morning came, pale sunlight slipped through the cracks in the shutters. He woke to the sound of movement outside. The woman was gathering wood near the shed. He watched her through the frost-glazed window. Her figure moved with purpose, every motion sure, like someone who had learned to depend on no one. When he stepped outside, the cold bit through his coat. She looked up at him, the light catching in her dark eyes. "You should rest," she said. "I've rested enough," he replied. "You got work to do. I can help." For a moment she looked like she might refuse, but then she nodded. "There's a fence out back that needs fixing." They worked through the morning, their breath rising in the cold air. He found comfort in the rhythm of it, the sound of hammer against wood, the smell of pine. She didn't talk much, but every so often their eyes met, and something passed between them, an unspoken understanding of two souls carrying too much silence. By noon, clouds began to gather again, heavy and gray. He looked toward the horizon. "Another storm's coming," she nodded. "The mountains keep us hidden, but they don't keep us safe." He frowned. "Safe from what?" "From men who don't forget," she said quietly. He turned toward her, but she had already gone back to her work. Her words stayed with him, echoing with a weight he couldn't shake. That evening, when they sat by the fire again, he finally asked, "What did you mean earlier? About men who don't forget?" She was silent for a while, then said, "After my husband died, they came back. Soldiers, ranchers, bounty men. They thought I had gold or weapons hidden here. They tore through this cabin, but they found nothing. I thought they'd stop. But sometimes at night, I still see their lights in the hills." He tensed. "You think they're watching?" "I know they are." The crackling of the fire filled the silence that followed. He looked at her face in the firelight and saw not fear, but the steady calm of someone who had lived too long with danger. He leaned forward. "If they come again, you can't face them alone." Her eyes met his. "And you think you can help me?" He hesitated. "I've got my reasons for not running anymore." She looked at him a long time before answering. "Maybe you're the one the wind meant to send." That night, neither of them slept much. He sat by the window, watching the snow fall, listening for any sound that didn't belong. The world outside was silent, but every creak of the cabin made his pulse quicken. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was out there. Near dawn, a faint glimmer of movement caught his eye. He leaned forward, peering through the frost. A shadow shifted among the trees, then vanished. He stood, reaching for his coat. "Someone's out there," he whispered. The woman rose quickly, her expression hardening. "Don't go out. They'll draw you away from the light." But he was already moving toward the door. He stepped into the cold, his boots crunching in the snow. The forest lay still, quiet enough to hear his own breath. He scanned the tree line but saw nothing. Only the pale morning light creeping through the pines. When he turned back, she was standing in the doorway, her blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. "I told you," she said softly. "They don't come close. They just watch." He joined her inside, the warmth of the fire hitting his face. "How long's this been going on?" "Since the spring after he died," she said. "Sometimes they leave marks on the trees. Warnings, maybe. Sometimes they just stay in the dark and wait." He looked around the cabin, the single window, the narrow door, the rifle by the hearth. If they're planning something, they'll come soon. Her eyes met his again, steady and calm. Then maybe it's time I stopped waiting. He studied her face, the strength, the sorrow, the quiet fire in her eyes, and knew she meant it. Whatever came next, she was done being afraid. The day passed slow. They gathered supplies, stacked wood, filled the water barrels. Every movement carried a sense of preparation, though neither spoke of it aloud. He caught himself watching her, more often than he meant to. The way she tied her hair back before stepping outside, the way she hummed softly when she worked. She moved with grace, but there was something heavy in her silence, like she was carrying years of unspoken grief. That night, as the sky turned black and the snow began again, they sat by the fire without speaking. The wind pressed against the cabin, and the flames danced between them. After a long time, she said quietly, "You should know, they killed more than my husband. They took my son, too. He was only 12. He froze, unsure what to say. She didn't look at him, only stared into the fire. They said they mistook him for a scout." I stopped asking why. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air thick with sorrow. He wanted to reach out, to say something, but words felt useless. When she finally looked at him, her eyes glistened in the firelight. "So you see, I've had enough of running and hiding. If they come again, I'll face them," he nodded slowly. "Then you won't face them alone." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the faint echo of distant hooves on frozen ground. The woman turned toward the sound, her face hardening. The man rose, reaching for the rifle by the hearth. The firelight glinted off the barrel. "They've come sooner than I thought," she said quietly. The sound grew louder, then faded again into the night, swallowed by the snow. Neither spoke after that. They stood together near the window, waiting, their shadows flickering against the walls as the wind howled across the valley. Somewhere out there, beyond the trees, the past was coming back, and this time, neither of them would face it alone. The sound of hooves faded into the distance, but neither of them moved from the window. The woman's hand rested lightly on the rifle, her eyes fixed on the dark line of trees. The man could feel her tension, the way her breath came slow and measured. The night outside felt alive, waiting. Somewhere out there, unseen, danger was taking shape. When the silence stretched too long, he finally whispered, "You think they're scouts?" She nodded. "Maybe. They don't ride close unless they're marking the land again." "Marking it for what?" "For someone who still wants what's left here," she said. "The valley's rich. There's water, good land, and minerals in the hills. Men have been fighting over it for years." He leaned against the wall, thinking. "And they'll keep fighting until it's theirs." She turned to him then, the firelight catching the faint scar that ran along her jaw. "It was ours once, before the treaties, before they drew lines through our mountains." He had no answer to that. He'd seen enough of the frontier to know the truth of her words. He had worked for the kind of men who carved up land like it was paper, never caring who bled for it. He'd left that life behind, but the guilt still followed him, buried deep. The next morning the sky was pale and heavy, the snow crusted into thin ice that cracked underfoot. The woman, he still didn't know her name and she hadn't offered it, moved quietly around the cabin. She fed the fire, boiled coffee, and stepped outside to check the traps near the creek. He followed her, his breath visible in the cold air. The world outside was still, but the woods felt different now, like eyes were watching. Tracks led toward the ridge, too deep and too straight to be from deer. He crouched and brushed away the snow, revealing the round imprint of a horse's shoe. "They were close," he said. She joined him, her expression grim, closer than before. They followed the tracks for a while, keeping low, their breath quickening in the cold. The prints led to a cluster of pines where the snow had been disturbed, as if someone had camped there not long ago. A few ashes still smoked faintly under a layer of frost. He touched the ground. "Last night," he said. "They're watching," she whispered. "Waiting to see if I'm alone." He looked around, his hand resting on the small revolver at his belt. "Then they know I'm here now." "Maybe that's what they wanted," she said softly. Her words unsettled him. He scanned the tree line again, but saw only the shifting of shadows. The wilderness had a way of hiding secrets, both man's and nature's. They headed back to the cabin in silence. Later, when the sun broke through the clouds, The man chopped wood behind the cabin while she tended to a small garden patch that clung stubbornly to life despite the frost. He found himself watching her again, curious. There was something about her that didn't fit with the world around her. Something calm, almost sacred. He wondered how someone could endure so much and still choose to stay in the place that hurt her most. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked. She didn't look up. "Every day. But this land was my husband's father's land. And before that it was his people's. I won't give it to men who destroy everything they touch." He nodded slowly. "You're braver than most I've known." "Not brave," she said quietly. "Just tired of losing." Her words lingered with him the rest of the day. He kept seeing her in flashes. The way she looked out toward the ridge, the sadness behind her strength. He wanted to ask her name again, but something about her silence made it feel wrong to push. That night, while the fire burned low, he couldn't sleep. Every sound outside pulled him back from the edge of rest. The memory of the hoofbeats, the tracks, the half-burned ashes, they all pressed on him like the weight of an unseen storm. Just before dawn, he heard movement outside. Soft, careful footsteps. He rose quietly, gripping his revolver. The woman stirred from her bed. "What is it?" she whispered. "Someone's out there." They both moved to the window. Through the dim gray light, he saw a figure standing at the edge of the clearing. A man on horseback, still and silent, watching the cabin. She drew in a sharp breath. "That's him," she whispered. "Who?" "The one who took my husband." The man on the horse turned his head slightly, as if he could hear her from that distance. Then he spurred the animal and disappeared into the trees. He turned to her, his jaw tight. "You're sure?" "I'd never forget his face," she said. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the rifle. The man could see the years of pain behind her calm. "He's come back for something," he said. She nodded. "He's come back to finish what he started." The day that followed was heavy with silence. Neither of them spoke much. They worked, they watched, and they waited. As the sun sank behind the hills, she finally broke the quiet. "There's a mine a mile east of here. That's where they brought my husband before they killed him. They said it was for the government, but I know better. They were digging for silver. They thought we were hiding it," he frowned. "Silver?" "Yes. The hills are full of it, but cursed for anyone who tries to take it. My husband said the spirits of the mountains guard it. He warned them. They didn't listen." He stared at her, unsure what to believe. "You think they're back for that?" "I think greed doesn't die," she said. As night fell again, the wind picked up, howling through the pines. They barred the door and kept the fire low. Every creak, every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. He stayed near the window, gun in hand, eyes on the dark. She sat near the fire, her expression distant, her lips moving as if in silent prayer. Hours passed before either spoke. "Tell me," he said finally. "Why didn't you run that night, when they came for him?" Her voice was low, steady. "Because he told me to stay. He said if I ran, they'd chase me. If I stayed, maybe they'd spare me. Did they?" She looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "They left me with everything but peace." The words cut through him more than he expected. He turned back to the window, jaw tight. The truth was, he wasn't just protecting her now. He was trying to find something in himself that he'd lost long ago. Something good, something worth standing for. Just before dawn, he saw light again. Lanterns moving through the trees. 4, maybe 5 men. "They're here," he said quietly. She rose from her chair, calm but cold, as if she'd known this moment would come. "Then let them come." They moved quickly, blowing out the fire and setting their positions. The air grew thick with silence, the kind that comes before violence. The first man appeared at the edge of the clearing, his gun drawn. "Inside," he shouted. "We don't want trouble. Just come out and no one gets hurt." The man exchanged a glance with her. Her expression didn't waver. "That's a lie," she whispered. He nodded slowly. "I know," the voice outside called again. "You're harboring a fugitive. That man's wanted. Turn him over and we'll leave you be." Her eyes flicked to his, and for the first time he saw fear there, not for herself, but for him. "They know who you are," she said quietly. "Seems so," he replied. He felt a surge of guilt. He had brought danger to her door, and now she was paying for it. But before he could speak, she shook her head. "Don't say it. You didn't bring them." The world did. A gunshot split the air. The bullet struck the doorframe, splintering wood. He ducked low, returning fire. The echo of gunfire filled the valley. Then came silence again. When he looked back, she was already reloading, her face calm and fierce. "They'll circle around," she said. "They always do." He could feel the adrenaline rushing through him, the pulse of survival. But beneath it was something else, fear that she might not make it through this night. Outside, another shot cracked through the trees, followed by the sound of hooves retreating. Then nothing. He looked at her. "You think they're gone?" She shook her head slowly. "No, they're waiting for morning." The fire was out, the room cold. Neither of them spoke. They sat in the dark, the smell of gunpowder still heavy in the air. He could see her outline against the faint light of dawn, still and strong, and he realized something had changed between them. They were no longer strangers thrown together by chance. They were two souls bound by loss, standing on the edge of something neither of them could name, something that might save them or destroy them both. Outside, the sky began to pale. Somewhere in the distance a crow called. The sound carried over the frozen valley like a warning, or a promise, that the fight was far from over. The morning came slow and gray, a thin mist curling through the pines. The snow had stopped, but the air was sharp with cold and silence. Smoke no longer rose from the cabin's chimney. They dared not light a fire. The woman stood by the window, her breath faint against the frosted glass. The man sat near the door, revolver in hand, listening. Every few moments he thought he heard something, the crack of a branch, the faint snort of a horse. But it was never close enough to see. Neither of them had slept. Their faces were pale from exhaustion, yet their eyes stayed sharp. The attack in the night had changed everything. Now they knew who hunted them and why. The men outside were not just bounty riders or thieves. They were part of something larger, something rooted in greed and revenge. The man adjusted his bandage and spoke low. "They'll come with daylight. Men like that always do. They think daylight makes them righteous." The woman turned, her expression unreadable. "Then we use the dark while we still have it." He watched her move across the cabin, gathering what little they had. Cartridges, a knife, a flask of water, a small pouch of herbs. Her movements were steady, practiced. She'd survived too much to panic now, but when their eyes met, he could see the fear she tried to hide. It wasn't for herself. It was for him. "You don't have to stay," she said softly. "They want you more than me. If you ride now, you might make it through the canyon." He shook his head. "I've been running half my life. If I leave now, I'll die out there or here." "Doesn't make much difference." "It does," she whispered. "It would mean I lose another person because of them." Her words struck him harder than the cold. He looked down, unsure what to say. Outside, the wind rustled faintly through the trees, and for a moment, the world felt smaller. Just the two of them inside that fragile cabin, surrounded by miles of wilderness and men who wanted them gone. By midday, the mist began to lift. Through the thinning fog, the man saw movement near the ridge. 3 riders, maybe more, cutting slowly through the trees. They kept their distance, circling like wolves. "They're scouting," he said, "waiting to see what we'll do." She joined him at the window. Her hand brushed against his arm as she leaned forward. "They're looking for fear," she murmured. "If they find it, they'll come faster." He studied her face, calm, resolute. "What would you have us do?" "Make them think we're ready," she said. They moved quickly, their breaths visible in the cold. He took up position near the door, checking his gun, while she gathered her husband's old bow from the corner. It was worn but still strong. She strung it with careful hands, her movements deliberate, almost reverent. "You know how to use that?" he asked. She glanced at him. "My father taught me before the world forgot his name." The look in her eyes told him enough. She wasn't afraid of killing, only of losing what little was left of her life's peace. The day dragged on with no sign of movement. The snow began to melt in patches, revealing frozen earth beneath. Around dusk, the wind shifted. The horses outside moved again, closer this time. The man raised his gun and motioned for her to stay low. Then came a voice from the woods, calm and steady. "We don't need more blood. Let's talk." The man's jaw tightened. He knew that voice, Claiborne. The name hit him like a blow to the chest. He hadn't heard it in years, not since the day he'd walked away from that life. Now it had followed him here. The woman looked at him sharply. "Who is it?" He hesitated. "Someone I used to ride with. Someone who doesn't forget betrayal." Claiborne's voice carried again through the trees. "You got a woman with you, don't you? A fine one, too. Don't make her pay for your choices, friend. Come out and we'll talk about mercy." The man's hand tightened around his revolver. "He's not here for talk," he said under his breath. "He's here to take what he wants." The woman's eyes hardened. Then he'll find out what it costs. Claiborne's men began to spread out, their shadows moving among the trees. The sound of metal and leather carried through the cold air. The man could almost see their faces in the dim light, faces he used to know, now hardened by greed and time. The woman knocked an arrow and whispered, "When I shoot, they'll rush. Be ready." He nodded. The world seemed to still for a heartbeat. Then the string twanged, and the arrow flew. It struck one of the riders in the shoulder, knocking him from his horse. The other shouted and charged. Gunfire erupted. Bullets slammed into the cabin walls, splinters flying. The man returned fire through a crack in the shutter, aiming low. He saw one of them fall, another retreat behind a tree. The smell of smoke filled the air, sharp and bitter. The woman reloaded quickly, her movement sure despite the chaos. She fired again, her arrow grazing a man's cheek and sending him sprawling into the snow. Then the gunfire stopped. Silence fell, heavy and strange. The smoke drifted through the broken window. "They're not gone," she whispered. He nodded. "No, they're waiting for us to step out." The quiet was worse than the gunfire. It pressed against the walls, thick and uneasy. Every small sound, the creak of wood, the drip of melting snow, felt louder, sharper. The man's heart pounded, his body tense. After a few long minutes, Claiborne's voice came again, softer now. "You always did have poor timing," he said. "You could have walked away clean, but you picked her. Tell me, what's she worth dying for?" The man felt the heat rise in his chest. "You wouldn't understand," he muttered. Claiborne laughed from somewhere in the trees. "No, I understand just fine. You were always looking for something to make you feel decent again. You think hiding with some widow makes you different from the rest of us?" The woman's eyes flicked toward him, searching his face. But he didn't answer Claiborne. He couldn't, not without letting the anger spill out. Then the woman whispered, "He's trying to make you angry. Don't let him." He exhaled slowly, lowering his gun just a little. "You're right," he said quietly. "But sooner or later, one of us is going to have to end this." The rest of the day bled into evening. The light faded, the air colder still. Claiborne's men retreated deeper into the forest, setting up campfires just beyond sight. Their laughter carried faintly through the dark, a reminder that they weren't finished. The woman and the man sat near the dying fire inside the cabin. She tended to the cuts on his arm while he stared into the flames. "He won't leave," he said. "Not until he gets what he came for." "And what's that?" she asked. He met her gaze. "Me, or what's left of me," she smiled sadly. "Then let him take your shadow, not your soul." He didn't answer. He didn't know how. The night deepened and the sounds outside grew fainter. The air smelled of smoke and pine. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The woman leaned back against the wall, exhaustion finally showing in her eyes. He sat beside her, the silence between them heavy but not empty. After a while, she spoke softly. "If I don't live through tomorrow, promise me something." He turned to her. "Don't talk like that. Promise me," she insisted. He hesitated, then nodded. "What is it?" "Don't bury me here," she whispered. "Take me to the river. That's where he's waiting." He swallowed hard, unable to speak. The pain in her voice twisted something deep inside him. "I'll keep you alive," he said finally. "That's my promise." She didn't argue. She just looked at him for a long moment, her eyes soft and distant, as if she were already somewhere far away. Outside, the wind picked up again, and the snow began to fall. The flickering firelight cast their shadows against the wall, two figures caught between past and future, between survival and surrender. As dawn neared, the faint sound of movement returned. Horses, men whispering, the sharp click of a rifle being loaded. The man stood, his hand steady on the gun. "It's starting," he said. The woman rose beside him, her bow ready. "Then we end it here." He looked at her, really looked at her, and felt a kind of peace he hadn't known in years. Maybe it was madness, or maybe it was the quiet understanding that some fights were worth staying for. Outside, the first light of morning spilled across the snow, catching the glint of rifles in the trees. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then Claiborne's voice came once more, closer now. "Time's up, old friend." The man took a slow breath and stepped toward the door, the woman at his side. Their hands brushed once, just enough to feel the warmth, the promise of something that might have been. And as the door creaked open to the blinding light beyond, the tension cracked like thunder, and the valley held still, just for a heartbeat before the storm truly began. The first gunshot broke the silence like lightning splitting the sky. Then the valley erupted in chaos. Bullets tore through the frosted air, echoing against the pines. The man dove for cover, pulling the woman down with him behind the log wall. The sound of gunfire was deafening, mixed with shouts and the stamp of hooves. Claiborne's men had closed in from both sides. Smoke filled the air, turning the world into a blur of gray and fire. The woman rose to fire her arrow, and one rider fell. Another bullet hit the cabin door, sending shards of wood flying past her shoulder. The man returned fire, steady and deliberate. He wasn't shooting for anger anymore, just survival. Each pull of the trigger felt heavier than the last, each echo fading slower. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the shooting began to thin. Claiborne's men were faltering, confused by resistance stronger than they'd expected. The man stepped out into the cold, smoke swirling around him, his revolver aimed. Across the snow, Claiborne emerged from behind a fallen tree, his face marked by years and regret. "So this is how it ends," Claiborne called out, his voice hoarse but steady. The man lowered his gun slightly. "It doesn't have to." Claiborne laughed bitterly. "You walked away from everything we built. You thought you could start over. You think men like us ever get to stop?" The man's eyes hardened. "I didn't walk away. I escaped." For a long moment they stood facing each other. Two ghosts from the same past, both too tired to hate and too proud to yield. The woman stepped out beside the man, bow still drawn. Her presence seemed to calm something in him, even as Claiborne's eyes flicked toward her. "You'd die for her?" Claiborne asked quietly. The man didn't hesitate. "I'd live for her." Something shifted in Claiborne's face then. A flicker of memory, of what it felt like to believe in something good. He exhaled, slow and deep. "You've got more courage than I ever did." His hand lowered. "Maybe that's worth letting live." But before he could turn away, one of his men, bloodied and furious, rose from behind a tree and fired. The bullet struck Claiborne in the side. He stumbled, surprise in his eyes. The man fired back instinctively, dropping the gunman where he stood. Claiborne fell to his knees, clutching his wound. The man ran to him, kneeling in the snow. Claiborne's breath came shallow and quick. "Guess it ends for me after all," he muttered, half smiling. "You didn't have to come to this," the man said quietly. Claiborne coughed, a faint laugh escaping his lips. "Maybe I did. We all pay for what we've done. Some of us just take longer getting there." His eyes drifted toward the horizon. "You make it out of here. Don't look back." He didn't say another word. The woman touched the man's shoulder, and together they buried Claiborne beneath the frozen earth at the edge of the woods. No words were spoken, none were needed. The past had finally caught up, and now it was done. By afternoon, the snow began to fall again. The surviving horses wandered off into the trees, their tracks fading as the wind picked up. The woman and the man returned to the cabin in silence. The place was half ruined, holes in the walls, smoke stains across the roof, but it was still standing. They patched what they could, moved what was left of their supplies, and sat near the quiet ashes of the fire. For the first time in days, there was peace. The air still smelled of gunpowder, but beneath it came the faint scent of pine and melting snow. The woman leaned back against the wall, her eyes tired but calm. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked. He looked toward the window, where the last light of day touched the trees. "It's never over, but maybe we've got a chance to start again," she smiled faintly. "You've said that before." "I didn't mean it then," he admitted. "I do now." They sat in silence for a while, letting the quiet fill the space where fear used to live. The wind outside softened, and the snow began to glow in the moonlight. For the first time, the forest didn't feel like a trap. It felt like protection. Days passed slowly after that. They rebuilt what had been broken, mended the fences, and planted small signs of life again. The man's wound healed, leaving only a thin scar as reminder. The woman began to hum as she worked, a habit she'd lost long ago. Sometimes he caught himself smiling at the sound without even knowing it. At night, they sat by the new fire, sharing quiet stories about the lives they'd left behind. He told her of the roads he'd ridden and the mistakes that had brought him there. She spoke of her husband, the simple joys they once had, and the day she decided not to let grief define her. Their stories tangled together like roots under snow, separate beginnings meeting in one place. Spring came early that year. The snow melted into streams that ran clear and bright. Birds returned to the trees, and with them came a strange feeling neither had expected: hope. One morning, the man saddled one of the horses and paused at the gate. The woman stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. "Going somewhere?" Just to the valley, he said. Need to see what's left out there. She nodded, her expression soft. You'll come back? He met her gaze. Every time. He rode down the slope, the sun cutting through the clouds. The forest was quiet now, no shadows moving, no voices whispering from the trees. He passed the place where Claiborne lay buried and stopped for a moment, bowing his head. You were right, he murmured. We all pay in the end. Then he turned his horse and rode on. When he returned that evening, the smell of stew filled the air. The woman was by the fire stirring the pot with a small smile. He sat across from her, tired but peaceful. For the first time in years, he felt like he belonged somewhere. As night fell, the two sat outside watching the stars rise above the treetops. The wind was gentle, the kind that carried no warning, just the scent of pine and smoke. The woman broke the silence. Do you ever think about what comes next? He looked at her, then at the stars. I used to think it was just about surviving. Now I think it's about finding something worth living for. She smiled, her eyes glimmering in the firelight. Then I'd say you found it. He didn't answer, but the warmth in his chest said enough. They stayed there long after the fire burned low, wrapped in the quiet rhythm of a world that had finally stopped chasing them. When morning came, the valley was bright and alive. The river ran clear, catching sunlight like glass. The man walked to the water's edge and stood there for a while, watching it move. Steady, endless, unbothered by what had passed. He thought of everything behind him, the violence, the guilt, the choices that had led him here. Then he thought of her, the woman who had stood beside him when no one else would. And he realized something simple. Redemption wasn't a place or a promise. It was a person. He turned back toward the cabin where smoke rose gently from the chimney. The sight made him smile. The past had taken enough from him. He wouldn't let it take this too. As he walked back up the hill, the snow beneath his boots gave way to earth and grass. The sun climbed higher, painting the pines gold. Somewhere behind him, the river kept flowing, carrying away everything that no longer needed to stay. By the time he reached the porch, the woman was there waiting, a mug of coffee in her hand and that same quiet strength in her eyes. Cold morning, she said. He took the cup and smiled. Not so bad. And for the first time in years, he meant it. The world wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Small, fragile, and alive. The ghosts were gone, the guns were quiet, and the cabin stood whole again. Life had returned, not as it was before, but as it was meant to be. Simple, human, and free. The man looked out toward the trees and felt something close to peace. We made it, he said softly. The woman reached for his hand. We did, and as the wind carried through the valley, brushing the tops of the pines, it felt like the land itself was finally breathing again, just like them.